Good afternoon and welcome to NTV's Week in Review. My name is Jim Froling and our top story this week comes to us from the Provincial House of Assembly, where conflict of interest charges continued to be leveled against Provincial Health Minister Dr. John Collins. Tempers flared in the Provincial House on Wednesday. Jim Thomas was there and has this report.
So I got provoked today. Yes, it did. I was provoked today, and I regret that.
Clyde Wells was so provoked that he referred to members on the government side as animals.
All they do is shout and rave like undisciplined animals, and that's essentially what they did.
It all happened as Mr. Wells pressed conflict of interest charges against Health Minister Dr. John Collins, one-quarter owner of a company, Terra Nova Enterprises, renting space to the government. MHAs on the government side, including the Premier, don't like the accusation one little bit.
And I think a lot of members are really upset by the way Mr. Wells is handling this affair.
Dr. Collins is not losing any sleep over it, he says, but he does regard it as a smirch on his good name.
I mean, is putting my name before the public in a most unfortunate and uncalled for light, and I therefore have to now finally get to my feet and say, Mr. Wells, you've got to stop this. What you're doing is reprehensible, it's anti-parliamentary, and it's just not honourable.
I blame the Premier for that. That's the standard that the Premier says is good enough for his government. That's the standard that he's offering the province, and it's a totally unacceptable standard, because what it's allowing is a company in which the Minister of Health owns 25% of the shares to do business with the government, directly with the government, totaling $500,000 a year. That's what the total rentals are. Do you realize, if you've looked at the figures that are in these answers that are tabled, there was an error. They used Terra Nova Investments, and that should have been Terra Nova Enterprises. It totals $487,000 a year. That's over 17% of the total rentals paid out by the government in the St. John's area. Goes to that one company in which the Minister of Health holds a 25% interest. Now, I say that contravenes the conflict of interest guidelines.
The Premier gives Dr. Collins a clean bill of health, and in this matter of conflict of interest, he's got the final say because he is, in effect, the judge and jury.
I don't think I'm being judge and jury. The conflict of interest guidelines were scrupulously followed by Dr. Collins, as a matter of fact, more so than Mr. Wells, because Mr. Wells has not disclosed all of his interests in his conflict of interest statement. So you have a person who hasn't disclosed all his interests attacking a person who has. So it's really ironic. The regulations are clear, and Dr. Collins put his shares in trust and therefore didn't know anything more about the company, and therefore everything is above board.
Well, which interests hasn't Mr. Wells disclosed?
We don't know what they are, because all he says is, I have other interests, but in my view, acting as God, I don't think they'll be in conflict with anything I'll do as Leader of the Opposition. And he shouldn't be the one to decide that. The people will decide that after we know all of his interests. And I just got a copy of his statement a few minutes ago that he gave to the Office of the Auditor General back in January, and he hasn't disclosed all of his interests. Here's a man, a minister, Dr. Collins, who has disclosed all his interests, has written me, put his shares in trust, has had nothing more to do with the company since that time, being accused of some kind of wrongdoing, and there is no wrongdoing there.
But Mr. Wells says there is, and he thinks that the options for Dr. Collins are clear.
In the circumstances, Dr. Collins either has to dispose of his interest in that company if the company is going to continue to do business with the government, or the company should cease to do business with the government, or Dr. Collins should resign.
It's hard to keep up with the man. What he's doing, though, he is suggesting and implying and stating that I am doing something reprehensible, dishonorable, and contrary to the guidelines, which is totally and absolutely untrue. So I have no alternative now but to get up on a point of privilege.
What is the point of privilege?
You will hear it tomorrow.
So don't miss tomorrow's episode in this continuing drama from the House of Assembly. Jim Toms, NTV News.
Also on Wednesday of this week, it was announced that an agreement on capelin prices for the 1988 season had finally been reached. That agreement was reached in the early mornings of Wednesday morning after what was an all-night bargaining session. It coincided with the official opening of the capelin fishery. We have this report.
Capelin prices for 1988 are up from last year's level, but marginally lower than prices paid in 1986, the best year on record. Nonetheless, Earl McCurdy, Secretary-Treasurer of the Fishermen's Union, says they are recommending acceptance of the offer.
This is a contract that gives the highest return for every dollar out of the marketplace, the fishermen get the highest return they've ever had from the capelin fishery. The market is unfortunately is about $300 a ton lower than it was in 1986. However, the prices are very close to the 86 prices, and they're far in excess of 1987 prices. So our committee is unanimously recommending that the fishermen accept these prices, and they'll be put to ratification votes starting tonight.
The agreement may also preclude the need for price negotiations next year. The Fishermen's Union has been offered an extension of the 88 contract into 1989.
There's an option for a second year in the agreement, subject to the agreement of the parties, and that would be based on the same market share in next year as the fishermen got this year, and that decision will only be made after the conclusion of the 88 fishery. We have a chance to see how it works, and if it is a fairly successful fishery, we would then have the option. The fishery would be done only by ratification vote of fishermen. They would have to approve it. We would have the option of fixing the market share for fishermen in advance for 1989, which would have the advantage of avoiding the last minute kind of panic to try and get a price settled.
The settlement of this year's capelin prices comes just as the 1988 capelin fishery opens. Earl McCurdy credits this timely settlement to actions taken by fishermen last season, when they stood up to unreasonable offers and refused to fish until a settlement was reached.
But I believe the reason for the increased market share, it clearly relates, at least in part, to the stand the fishermen took last year when they stuck together. That certainly gives their negotiating committee a lot more credibility when they can demonstrate that the fishermen are fully behind them. So that stand the fishermen took last year certainly stood them in good stead in terms of negotiating better prices in 1988.
Paul Harpel, NTV News.
In other labor news of the past week, the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labor announced that it was launching a province-wide boycott of Versa Foods Limited. The boycott was in retaliation of a company decision to shut down one of its operations in the province. That left some 18 people out of work.
Since March 21st of this year, 18 workers from the Arts and Culture Centre have been on strike for better wages. During the strike, Versa Food Services announced that it was ending its catering contract at the Arts and Culture Centre. The workers were laid off as a result of that action. Now, officials of the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labor and the Newfoundland Association of Public Employees are calling for a boycott of all operations of Versa services in the province.
Yes, if they can beat the employees at the Arts and Culture Centre, then what says they're not going to move on to another area and try to beat the employees? So the message is going to be very clear to Versa Foods, and the second message is to those who may want to do business in the province in the future.
So what's your objective? What are you looking for?
Our objective is to teach them that workers in this province have the right to become a member of a union of their choice, and once they are certified, then the employer has an obligation to negotiate a collective agreement with them.
Parsons also wonders what happened to Premier Peckford's promise to guarantee successor rights for workers.
So what this union is doing, they are saying to those employees that you are not going to be left out in the cold. Whichever employer takes over this business, you are going to be their employees, you are going to be members of the union, and we're going to have a collective agreement. And we will then have taught the government a lesson that we can do and have to do by the ways and means in which we have to do it, what they can do by 10 minutes of an amendment in the legislature.
Despite the current situation, there is hope for the laid-off workers. Ongoing negotiations may see the workers return to their jobs in the near future.
We've negotiated, yes, for a period of time with this new company, and if they get the contract, they're willing to take all the employees. We have a wage rate in mind that both parties can live with, but the rest of the collective agreement would have to be negotiated.
So this new company, can you tell us who it is, name the company?
No, we can't name the company because there's other people in the bids, and we've had discussions with other companies too, but we haven't got as far with the other companies as we have with this one. So,
even if the workers don't get any satisfaction from the boycott, the message will be loud and clear that Newfoundland workers are not without unity or dignity. Craig Branton, NTV News.
This, of course, was the week of the Moscow summit. We'll report on that story when we return in a moment and continue with this edition of NTV's Week in Review.
I'm Beth Penny. We could all use a little bit of good news these days, so join me Monday nights on the award-winning NTV Evening News Hour for Silver Linings.
Hi, I'm Mary Kate O'Neill. From everyday heroes to people making a big difference in the world, join me for Inspiring NL, Thursdays on the award-winning NTV Evening News Hour.
Briefly now in international news, the Moscow summit ended on Thursday with the signing of 2 agreements on arms limitation, although they were minor agreements. Correspondent Andrea Mitchell reported on what will be the last meeting between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev.
The president came to London to reassert democratic values after his trip to Moscow and pay tribute to Margaret Thatcher, his most trusted ally and friend during years of stormy debate over arms control. On the flight to London, Chief of Staff Howard Baker said that some of the talks between the president and Gorbachev had been tumultuous, that they had gone toe-to-toe at virtually every meeting. But the farewells in Moscow showed a different side of the relationship. U.S. officials say the 2 men have established the ability to communicate and get past disagreements. In fact, American officials now say a serious dispute arose over a Gorbachev proposal for the 2 men to endorse peaceful coexistence, a joint statement that Mr. Reagan almost accepted until told by his advisors that wrapped in those neutral words was a potential policy trap. As for the dispute over human rights, before going into the U.S. ambassador's house in London to rest, Mr. Reagan tried to explain why he seemed to be blaming immigration problems in the Soviet Union on bureaucracy. He said that sometimes some of those cases don't move quickly enough up the ladder. But other officials are saying that the president muted his criticism because he had given the names of 14 dissidents to Gorbachev, and some of those people may be getting out.
In other news, predictions of a bright future for Fishery Products International were given this past Monday, and that by company president and chief executive officer Vic Young. On Monday, Young forecasted that within the next few years, Fishery Products International would become a force to contend with in the international fish market.
This is Vic Young. He's generally credited with leading the fishing company known as Fishery Products International from a disastrous money loser to a profit-making venture that lured Newfoundlanders to invest $22 million in it during last year's privatization procedure. These investors are still caught up in what the shares are worth from day to day. But Vic Young made it known today that he's far more intent on making it a truly international company.
Well, most people say to me these days, how is your stock doing? How come it's down to $13? And how is your first quarter? And how are you doing in the second quarter? And all of that is very important, and I don't mean to downgrade it by any means, because if you're running a company, you have to watch what's happening day to day. But just as importantly, they should be saying to us, where the hell is Fishery Products going to be in the year 2000?
That's what Mr. Young looked ahead to in a luncheon address today to the Newfoundland Ocean Industries Association. What he has in mind over the next few years is getting his company involved in joint venture participation in fishing activities around the world, even catfishing in the Mississippi Delta.
I don't mean that we're going to grow catfish in Newfoundland, but I do mean that we have to be interested in acquiring these kinds of companies or doing joint ventures with these kinds of companies. We have to spread our horizons well beyond the island of Newfoundland so that our own Newfoundland operations will survive. And when we look at Alaska, there's a fishery up in Alaska with Alaskan pollock, Alaskan cod, and Alaskan flatfish that it's only a matter of time that it comes on stream, becomes a force in the international marketplace, and again, companies like FPI have to be very much involved in that if we're to have a long-term future.
As Mr. Young put it, his company has to spread its horizons to make sure it survives in Newfoundland and to be ready to go wherever international markets demand it.
And today we are trying to put some emphasis on where will FPI's shares be next month and what will our year-end results look like for 1988, but more importantly, where will our company be in the year 2000? And in order for it to be in Newfoundland, to be a solid Newfoundland operation, we will find ourselves in Japan or in Alaska or in the Mississippi Delta or God knows where the international seafood markets will take us. But we have to be there if it's going to be a long-term company.
Jim Toms, NTV News.
And there were more calls for the elimination of non-returnable bottles and cans from this province during the past week. On Thursday, NTV's Paul Harpel reported on what is the latest campaign to lobby for legislation that would make returnable bottles mandatory here in this province.
Lobby groups have been calling on the provincial government for years to ban the sale of non-returnable bottles and cans in the province. Last year, the provincial government launched an inquiry into the aluminum can industry, but so far has not adopted a policy on the non-returnable bottle issue.
Big business is controlling government in that I often wonder how much money these companies put into political coffers to support the parties that are in power. Of course, now I'm being kind of pessimistic about it all, but what I'm saying is that I think that the big business have a lot of control. You know, you're not talking about a small company. You're talking about multinationals that influence government and that have certain ways to control government.
The Association of Youth Serving Agencies is urging groups in favor of making returnable bottles and cans mandatory to write government voicing their opinion. Tilly says if their letter campaign is unsuccessful in convincing government to ban non-returnable containers, they will step up their campaign.
We're hoping to go in certain parts of the highway and erect certain, I would say, not monuments, but like this is where this bottle died, okay, and kind of put up signs and that, okay, where people can see, okay, that there was a lot of garbage, a lot of bottles, and we're going to collect all the bottles up and hopefully perhaps march to Confederation Building with a lot more support from Newfoundlanders and deposit them in the right place.
Brewery workers in the province have also been fighting to ban the sale of non-returnable containers. NAPE Representative Steve Beckwith, who chairs the union's Ban the Can Committee, says for them it's a matter of fighting to save jobs.
So we don't have to worry about anti-dumping legislation with regards to dumping products in here that are not in refillable containers. Because if you put it in refillable containers, then the brewing industry is that much closer to being safe in the province. The soft drink industry don't have to worry too much about large corporations shutting down the local regional plants and importing it from mega plants somewhere in the country. Mm-hmm. So we've always said it must be returnable or refillable. The refillable ensures the jobs, returnable cleans up the environment.
Beckwith says they, like many other groups, are tired of waiting for government to take a stand on the non-returnable bottle issue. He agrees that the delay may be a result of the influence of big business.
The inquiry is a perfect example. We had an inquiry in February of '87 on the effect of aluminum can was going to have on the province environmentally and also on the jobs in the province. And government has not, they've got the report, I mean the report has gone in, they've got it over a year, they have not moved on the recommendations of that report. And the number one recommendation was a total ban in the brewing industry on aluminum containers, on non-refillable, non-returnable containers. So that indicates to us that the youth group are quite true in what they're saying, that the government are not acting upon the wishes of the public.
Paul Harpel, NTV News.
And residents of a subdivision here on the outskirts of St. John's received some good news during the past week. On Monday of this week, Metro Board issued an order to City Sand and Gravel to cease blasting in its gravel pit until it was determined if residents of the Elizabeth Park were being put at risk. NTV's Craig Branton with the story.
10 days ago, NTV's Paul Harpel reported that residents in the Lakeshore Homes area were concerned by rocks flying from the nearby quarry of City Sand and Gravel. Now, the St. John's Metro Board has ordered the company to stop all blasting operations. Metro Board is calling for an investigation of any safety hazard presented to area homeowners.
I think the committee will be pleased, and I think the citizens will be pleased. But I understand it's only for a 2-week period. maybe we can use the 2 weeks, and Metro Board and whoever else, health and safety, can look into the matter of the pit and the blasting that's been going on, and maybe they can come up with some solutions.
According to official sources, City Sand and Gravel has always run a safe operation. However, in the face of this stop blasting order, City Sand and Gravel may not have an operation to run.
Well, at the present time, from the last blast, we have approximately 2 to 3 weeks material to crush. After that, I guess, unless the order is rescinded, we would have to shut down operations.
And what would that mean for your company, your employees?
Well, we would have to lay off our employees, and obviously you can't keep a company shut down or they go broke.
O'Keefe says to reduce the risk of flying rock and gravel, it would cost his company upwards of $50,000 for each blast, which he says would put his company out of business. Residents in the area want something done to combat the problem. Now that an investigation has been called for by Metro Board, it remains a wait-and-see situation. According to Metro Board officials, an investigation could take a number of weeks to complete. Craig Branton, NTV News.
More news in a moment when we continue with NTV's Week in Review.
You're watching NTV, Canada's leading superstation.
Finally today, National Health and Welfare Minister Jake Epp had some good news for Newfoundlanders, and it was with regard to the federal daycare program. The federal government might be introducing a 90-10 cost-shared split with the province instead of the 75-25 that's proposed for the nation as a whole. Mr. Epp was in St. John's during the week to speak to the Canadian Lung Association. He was questioned about daycare in an interview following his address.
Mr. Epp recognizes that as one of the poorer provinces, Newfoundland might be hard-pressed to come up with its share of a 75-25 daycare program. But he knows, too, what the province wants, as it seeks to take part in his plan to provide at least 200,000 additional spaces across the nation over 7 years.
When you ask me what percentage, it could be higher than 75%. And the reason I can't give you a specific percentage is for these reasons. A, it will depend on how many spaces Newfoundland will create over the 7-year boost because of the 75% factor which the federal government is willing to pay for nonprofit. And secondly, as other provinces also spend money, what the national spending average will be and how Newfoundland relates to that percentage. But maybe I can give it to you in general terms. It will be in the order of approximately 75%. It might be somewhat higher, but it depends on what we call provincial behavior over the 7 years.
Well, daycare advocates in this province say if we're going to make any real gains in daycare, we're going to need a 90-10 split.
Well, we have looked at it. It might come to that, but I can't confirm that. And the reason I can't confirm that is it's based on those two factors of the formula. But I can say this, that Newfoundland will have a more generous split, percentage-wise, that is the federal government, than any other province, and that is because of the matter it was designed or the way it was designed, yes.
Some sources had suggested that the Newfoundland government might be dragging its feet in getting ready for the program. But according to Mr. Epp, that's not so.
In fairness to the Newfoundland government, and you'll find that there has not been friction between the federal government and the provincial governments. We've been working together very cooperatively. And that is when I announced the child care program, I said that while the pressure would remain on the federal government to show leadership, and that's our responsibility, that for the provinces they would also have to come up with their share of the money, which is a difficulty for some provinces. That's not because they don't want to have the programs. It's a matter of having to try and balance their budgets as well, or to meet the various expenditure needs. So I believe we'll work out an arrangement. I'm looking forward to have the legislation into the House before the end of this month, and passage before we rise for summer. And Newfoundland has not been a stumbling block.
Do you know what Newfoundland wants?
Yeah. We have a good idea, yes, what Newfoundland wants, what Newfoundland feels they can afford, but obviously I can't negotiate with you in public or convey to you what Newfoundland's plans are. That's for them to do once we've finalized the agreements and signed agreements with Newfoundland. Obviously, they'll become public.
The federal health minister stressed there is no problem with federal-provincial cooperation in the program. The problem is to find all the money that will be needed for it.
And what we now have are, if we put together all 12 plans, that it is more than the amount of money that we projected. But we have not finalized all the negotiations, and if there has to be some adjustment, that we will look at in terms of negotiations with the provinces. But it's not a case of disagreement between the federal and the provincial governments. It's more, how can we meet both the objectives and the needs?
Jim Toms, NTV News.
That's NTV's Week in Review for another week. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. We look forward to seeing you on the news on Monday.